Which is more important, to have expertise in the industry or to believe and feel in the problem?
I think they're both important. I think understanding the problem and being able to believe that you actually have something that you're passionate about, that you actually believe in, they're equally important.
But what do you feel has changed?
There's always going to be things changing, but there's always going to be things that don't ever change. And so it's easy to get distracted by shiny object syndrome, which I'm sure we're going to get into all cool technologies and AI on this podcast. But what never changes.
Hey Sales Nation, my name is Will Barron and welcome to today's episode of the Salesman podcast. On today's episode, we have Josh Braun. Josh is a sales trainer who helps sellers become a mint scoop in a vanilla of sales messages. Essentially, he helps you stand out and get noticed in the highly competitive and noisy marketplace that we're all selling into. On this episode of the show, we cover the most essential fundamentals of sales that we need to master in 2025 as we record this episode, and also how to leverage ChatGPT to improve your sales communications. Everything that we talk about in this episode is available in the show notes over at salesman.com. And with that said, let's jump right into it.
Cool. So Josh, welcome back again to the Salesman podcast.
Thanks for having me, Will.
You're more welcome. So look forward to having a chat with you. So we last recorded, it was about, it'll be 3 years in a couple of months from now, which is obviously a lot has changed. We've had a lot of kind of global turmoil, ups and downs all over the place. So we won't get into global politics and especially the president you've got right now and the polarity of all that. But I want to start the show before we get into the fundamentals, before we get into what's working right now. I want to just ask you the open-ended question of not even what do you know, but what do you feel has changed since last time we spoke about 3 years ago in sales, communicating with other people, the technology, the tool, all that good stuff?
I love this question so much, and I get it asked a lot, and I have a little bit of a different answer. My answer is that there's always going to be things changing, but there's always going to be things that don't ever change. And so it's easy to get distracted by shiny object syndrome, which I'm sure we're going to get into all cool technologies and AI on this podcast. But what never changes is a deep understanding of the prospect's problem. And so many sales organizations are focused on product training. And the risk of that is that when you reach out to people and you can't, as Robert Collier said, join the conversation happening in their mind, so they kind of know that you get them, it's going to be very difficult for you to have them relate to what it is that you're saying and ultimately start conversations. I'll just give you a quick example of that. A while back, I was doing triathlons, and someone on LinkedIn saw that I was doing triathlons and was a triathlete and called me up. And this is exactly what he said, and I'll butcher it a little bit, but you can see how the depth of understanding he has of the problem. He said, "Josh, I know you're training for your first Ironman, which usually means you're training about 20 hours and you're eating all the Snickers bars out of the drawer, and you're probably having dinner at like 5 p.m. and getting up at like 6. I have a name for that. I call it divorce by triathlon." Now, if you haven't been a triathlete, you probably can't relate to that. But if you're a triathlete, that person understands the problem, and I'm nodding as he is saying the words he's saying. That's because he's problem trained. So the thing that's never going to change is to get problem trained. How do you do that? Ask customers to show you how they were getting the job done before they switched, and be very rigorously deep into that. I'm a copywriter. I'm a member of a copywriting group. We don't talk about copywriting techniques and what's changed. We talk about how do we get to know the customer's problems better.
Whose responsibility is that? It's kind of a loaded question here, but whose responsibility is that? Marketing, the individual salesperson, sales leadership to feed that down? And also, I guess a follow-up question to that is, how nuanced does that be? Could marketing come up with this formula and give it you, or do you have to communicate it in a way that is congruent from you to your customers as well?
So I have to be able to feel it, right? So as a salesperson, I have to be able to feel the problem at a very deep level. Like, I'll give you another example. If I knew that I had a cure for a very specific type of cancer, let's say testicular cancer, and I knew it, I was like, I get that I have this, people have this problem and they're solving it this way and it's not working. There's a feeling that I get when I pick up the phone and when I do outreach and when I have conversations with people on Discovery Call. That's different because I've kind of walked in the shoes. I've gone on cancer wards. I see the current chemotherapy treatment. I see how people are starting to get radiation. Like I can feel that in my bones. Maybe I've read that. Maybe I've heard customers. My preference is for salespeople to actually talk to customers that have recently switched. And you don't need to talk to many, 4 or 5. We can get deeper into this, but use something called jobs to be done to understand the events and circumstances that cause people to fire what they were using and hire what you have now. And you're going to hear these 3 or 4 themes, and they're going to say things on that call, like divorced by a triathlon, that in no way you're ever going to be able to figure out for yourself or marketing is going to be able to give you because it's coming out of the words of the customer. You can also look at success stories, but only for things in quotes, meaning they came out of the customer's mouth and they're visceral, meaning they're using words like hate, struggled, super frustrating, and you start a library called a lingo library, and you put those words in there, and you can use those in your cold call talk tracks and in your emails. But if you don't feel it, you can't see it, it's going to be really hard for you to kind of go through the paces. I was working with a company, Snowflake. They sell to IT, and these are SDRs that have never been in IT, and they're barking at the print. That's a word we used when I was a teacher, where you have a 5-year-old that can read print, but they don't know what they're saying. So they were saying all sorts of words, but you could tell they didn't understand it at a visceral level, and therefore they were really wobbly on the phone. So this show and tell concept and being able to sort of really wrap your head around walking the cancer ward and feeling it is I think, super important and something that's never going to change in sales.
Which is more important, to be to have expertise in the industry or to believe and feel in the product?
I think they're both important. I think understanding the problem and being able to believe that you actually have something that you're passionate about, that you actually believe in, they're equally important. So many of the people that are selling tech, they don't really know what it is exactly, and certainly don't believe it. And that comes through. So advice out there to people would be to do sell something that you believe in. I mean, a quick side note, there's a restaurant up the street called Tin Muffin on Palmetto for anyone that's in Boca. And I'm there having lunch one day, and I'm not a dessert guy. And the server comes up to me, I think her name was Debbie. Yeah, Debbie. And she said, are you afraid of dessert? That was I think you call it a pattern interrupt, Will. I'm like, I'm not afraid of it. She goes, I don't even like banana cream pie. I don't even like bananas. But we have a banana cake here that is life-altering. I have 2 cats and 2 kids, and this is the greatest thing in my life. If you'd like, I could check to see if we have a slice left. And I'm like, bring it, right? She is very passionate about the product, and I think that's contagious. So it's like asking you which kid to pick. Well, I could pick one of those actually, but yeah, I think they're equally both important.
Sure. We've all probably, especially you've done enough sales training now as have I. We've all been in this situation where new person joins the team. They know nothing about what they're doing. They just run out and overload of enthusiasm. For 6 months, they absolutely smash everyone, and then they fall into the same routines, or they get a bit lazy. They start to build a cadence rather than you're trying to systemize the process, and the results just go into the shitter over time. So, and I think that is testament. And most salespeople who've been in sales for a while have seen that if they've been on a bunch of different teams over the years. Most people will have experienced that. And I think that's testament to the value of, even if it's naivety at first, you don't really know the value of what you're selling. But the boss has said this. You watched this corporate video that said that. I think that goes a long way in building energy in conversations. And once you've had the conversations 1,000 times, then you almost you've got to switch things up, or you've got to find a way to reinvigorate yourself. Because expertise alone is interesting, but it's not contagious.
Or another take on this. I know, Will, you were telling me before we rolled this podcast that you're into boxing now, and I do some sports as well. And I would imagine some days, if you're like me, you're not as into it for whatever reason. Maybe you're tired. And I think that's the same thing in sales and life. And to be kind to yourself and to realize that not every day you're going to be energetic and upbeat, and to just accept that, not to push it down and to try to defeat it, but to just say, hey, today I'm feeling a little bit, not as energetic as I am because I'm a person, and that's okay. It's okay that I feel this way. I'm going to take a little bit of a walk and just accept that that's, how it is. And tomorrow's another day. But to feel like we have to bring our 100%, at a level 10, all the time, I think we're a little hard on ourselves sometimes in that way.
Sure, but I didn't stay. Box. What we are now? 3 hours ago, 4 hours ago, Michelle, my coach, 3-time world champion boxer, I was like, hey, I've got 4 podcasts this afternoon. I need to be alive because she will wreck me. Even just the risk of her like slapping a pad around my head when I'm not paying attention. That focus, I will genuinely go for a nap afterwards. I'll come back, have a protein shake. I'll lie on the sofa. The dog will be sat next to me going, hey, guy, what are we doing, dude? I've been sat here bored on my own for an hour. I'll lie down, have a 15-minute nap. And I sometimes need that just to reconfigure. And I said to her today, I've got these podcasts, they're important. I want to do a good job with them. And so we just chilled, just moved around, hit the pads, and I'm feeling pretty good energy levels now. So sometimes some of this is understanding your limits, the boundaries of your energy, and using it in a productive way, right?
Yeah, I don't really think it's a limit. I mean, it's not a limit when you run out of oxygen and you're doing sprints. It's how the human body is. I mean, it ebbs and flows like an ocean. And this idea of just accepting how it is without judging it and just observing and sitting with it, I think can make our profession a lot less stressful.
So what is the value in a human telling you or asking you if you're afraid of cake, dessert, rather than a AI chatbot saying the same thing? Because that's kind of where we're heading with some of this. We're very quickly, the cold outreach tools that we're working with right now, sales.com for one of my business I'm a co-founder in, we're booking 3 or 4 meetings a week. And it's all automated. The emails are incredible. We use kind of avatars to build that rapport and to train up these AI tools on the back of people's LinkedIn profiles. We're in this business, we're selling to small business owners here in the UK, so they've all got a website, they've all got a bio page. It's all perfectly personalized. It is far superior than a shitty SDR or BDR, and it's booking meetings and it's effective. But I think there is still a gap between person saying this and then generic email account number 47 saying this.
Yeah, so I do think, like you, these tools are getting really good. I mean, they're at the point now where it's, if you know how to prompt engineer them well enough, it's almost impossible to tell if like a LinkedIn post, for instance, has been written by AI or a human. I've been using ChatGPT for quite a long time in sales trainings to be able to help reps message better and help them understand their ICP. And I also use it as I write my LinkedIn posts as a co-pilot. So I'll say to it, I got this thing happen to me. I got this idea, and it knows my writing style because we've been working together for so long, and it'll help me like draft some stuff up, or I'll be struggling with an ending and it'll give me like 10 versions. And it has gotten to the point where it's pretty much impossible for people to know if it's like AI or not. I think where the gap is if you leave it by its default. Like if you don't do the work, at least right now, it can be a little bit generic and can start to sound very like a marketing brochure and use words and language that don't feel like the example I gave at the beginning, like divorced by triathlon. And we can give some other examples of this, but that's going to put you in the pile of, I can't relate to this. It's so generic and robotic that it doesn't make me feel anything. Versus, I give you another example. This is just like last week. I was going to see Sarah Silverman, who's a comedian down in Miami. And if you've ever gone to see an event down in Miami, the worst part of it is parking. I mean, it is just the worst. Like, it's terrible. So I was lamenting to my friend about this, that's dreading it. And he goes, so when you go to Miami, do you normally drive down there and find a parking spot? Do you hire a driver? Or do you have a parking spot that's already reserved that you can get in and out of when the show's over? And that third option, I was like, what is that? And there was a thing called Spot Hero. I had no idea what it was. And I'm like, what is that? He goes, it's called Spot Hero. You've probably heard of it. And I go, I've never heard of it. And I leaned forward and I used it. And what it does is what it sounds like. It finds a spot at someone's house or some out of the way place that's within walking distance. You reserve it, you pull in, you leave, you don't get to deal with the crowds. It was fantastic. But that level of being specific, down in Miami, seeing a venue, are you like taking a driver? Are you like, see that word? Are you like? That's a conversational. You can get ChatGPT to do that, but you got to know like when it's not there and prompt engineer it to get there. So now I've got these prompts that can pretty much come up with what I call these poke the bear questions, like on tap for whatever product you're solving or problem you're solving. But I've engineered the prompt that way, but it still requires a human to say it. Now, I've heard AI making cold calls as well. I could see, okay, there's the right question, but the tonality is not quite there yet, or I know it. So the way I'm thinking about getting around that now is just to have the bot loan up to the fact, break the fourth wall. Hey, I'm a bot making cold calls for this company. Will you give me a shot? Now there's going to be enough curiosity there, and then you can get into like the substance of the call, which are those poke the bear questions. And I think that's a real, good opportunity for people.
How does someone who, so with your background in education, you're obviously, I've commented on this in the past, you're kind of fantastic writer, content creator. You mentioned copywriting earlier on very specifically. How does someone who perhaps doesn't have the unconscious confidence in these skills, how do they should they use ChatGPT, or should they just focus on understanding what their own voice is? Or should they be using it in, because everyone's going to use it, everyone's going to want to shortcut the process, right? Everyone's going to want to hack it and use these shiny objects. Again, you mentioned shiny objects and kind of the grass is always green earlier on. Would you encourage people to learn copywriting, read a book on it? Heaven forbid, go back on Amazon and find a book from the 60s, 70s, 80s on copywriting and learn the fundamentals. What is the process to getting the base of all this nailed, so that then we can stick the tools on top?
I think it's the same as boxing. And I think it's the same as, I'm taking guitar lessons, I'm taking piano lessons, I'm learning how to do watercolor. We're so fortunate to live in a world now where everything is just a Google search away. Copywriting, in my opinion, is another one of those skills that doesn't change. Right? It's another one of those things that's never going to go away. So yeah, knowing how to copyright, knowing how to be an active listener. Again, it's a skill we take for granted. Oh, you have to listen in sales. You have to listen more than you're talking about. How do I do that? How do I practice it? Just like boxing. Like, I know I have to do this jab, but like, how do I do it? How do I get better at it? How do I get the reps in? These are all skills that can be learned and mastered. With ChatGPT in particular, one thing you could start to do is you maybe see something you like and you want to replicate it. You could put the thing that you like in ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT to develop a prompt that will allow you to plug in different things to be able to learn from it and, scale it up to different personas or different industries. So again, it's a co-pilot right now. It's a great tool to use. I do think it should be on your radar. You should be tinkering with it. But these are skills that are easily, that you can learn if you want, like anything. So yeah, invest in yourself. And one of the objections I got, I was doing a sales training 3 or 4 weeks ago. I use the premium version of ChatGPT, and we don't have to get into why, but it's $20 a month. And there was some pushback. Yeah, but that's like $20 a month. I'm like, yeah, but you have to spend money on your skills. You got it. Maybe you take a course, you read a book, you spend $20 a month. It's not a year-long subscription. You start to dabble in these things. You see what other people are doing. You kind of get immersed in it. Just like you with your boxing. I'm sure you're taking lessons and you have a coach that's guiding you and mentoring you. You probably read about it. I'm the same way with watercolors now. So that's the great world we live in. It's a Google search away.
Dude, I've done the same 8 combinations week in, week out for nearly 3 years.
Yes.
Because if you're in a fight, if you can throw a jab, make the person go, what? And then you just land a straight, that is 80% of fights.
Yes.
Then it is, does the person see, okay, well now you want to throw a hook. So it's a game of chess that builds on top of itself. But that is, obviously, I'm never going to be an exceptional, I wouldn't even consider myself a fighter in general. I'm a peasant, put that word in the sentence. But I'm never going to be exceptional at boxing. It's a hobby. It's something that I like doing. It's a good laugh and it keeps me in shape. And it's a good skill to be able to throw a punch if you needed to defend yourself, right? But it's just those fundamentals over and over. It's the footwork of not crossing your feet if you don't trip up. And basically, it's the ability to move your feet, throw a punch, and especially after a few pints, not fall on your ass and take a good beating from a group of fellas or a group of women. Who knows, right? So That's what it comes down to, essentially.
You make such a good point. I mean, if you want to get good at anything, you have to know what good is. So I'm taking piano lessons now. And so, Josh, this is how you hold your hands so there's no tension. This is how you play a C major scale. So you have to know what good looks like. Then you have to practice good. So practice doesn't make perfect. As my piano teacher said, practice makes permanent. You can do the poor technique and playing it wrong and burn that in and get good at playing poorly. So knowing what good is on a cold call, what a cold email is, what piano is, what a good jab, what does good look like? Then you practice good while preferably you have a coach watching you play the piano or throw a jab, and they make corrections as you go. And then you just got to do the thing. You just got to go do the thing. I mean, I had a conversation with my triathlon coach a while back, and I told her I'm afraid at the swim start. There are like people kicking. It's like 6 a.m. It's like crazy. I go, how do I not be afraid anymore? And I'll never forget what she said to me. It stuck with me. She goes, you just do it afraid. You just do it afraid. It doesn't, that's what you do. You do it afraid. And as you do it afraid more and more and more, you're still afraid, but you realize, okay, after 5 minutes, it thins out and it's all okay. You know, the afraid and the excitement are the same sort of biological marker. We just label them differently, but you just do it. You just do it over and over and over again once you know what good is. And pick your good. There's 50,000 people on cold calls, or I'm sure there's 50,000 people on how to throw the perfect jab. They're all fine. You just pick one that you like and just get good at that thing like you're doing. And that's the reps.
So I recorded a podcast earlier on today. I won't say who it is. The audience will know who it is. I just don't want to call them out on this specific thing. Because I challenged them on it a little bit, but they have a little bit of a bee in their bonnet. They are an older sales trainer, but they are more old school. Probably a way of describing it, right? They have a bit of a bee in their bonnet about the number of, and you and I kind of fit this category as well, right? Of quote unquote influencers. So people who have influence in the sales training space, whether that be someone who had at one end of the scale a good year and now has created a product, or someone like you and I who I was okay at sales, was pretty good. I wasn't exceptional. That's not the podcast, and people after training and the business grow organically. But you've been in the business 8 or 9 years. I've been in business for 9, 10 years at this point. So it's kind of a different end of the scale of we wouldn't be in business if what we were communicating was terrible. I mean, I don't know about you. I certainly don't have anyone funding this. So if I was talking a lot of nonsense, I would have failed a lot quicker than where I am right now. So with that being said, when we do go on LinkedIn and there are almost unlimited people to follow to look at when we're trying to emulate what is good, or when we're trying to distill what is good so we can build our version of it, how would you discern, if you were back in sales, you're 26, you maybe got a year or two in, you're hitting quota, but you want to take things to that next level. How would you discern whether someone is full of shit or whether someone is the coach and mentor that you can follow?
Yeah, so few things are objectively true. So 2 + 2 in standard mathematics is 4. My name is Josh. Your name is Will. Those things are objectively true. Everything on LinkedIn, including what I write, is not objectively true. It's a perspective, not a fact. Everything on LinkedIn that you read is a perspective, not a fact. So you pick a perspective that resonates with you, and then you do experiments, and you find out what works. Because nobody knows what works on LinkedIn. They only know what's worked for them with their perspective and their experiences. So this is what I like about our profession, is there is no answer on the best cold call opener, the best cold email, the whatever. It's a process of you finding something that you thought was interesting and running tiny experiments and learning for yourself. So I always say, don't ask for advice, ask for feedback. Try some things and realize that nobody's right or wrong on LinkedIn. I mean, there was a post a couple of days ago where people were railing against Grant Cardone and a couple other people, Jordan Belfort, I think, about this and push. I'm like, it's a perspective. That's worked for them. It's not a fact. I'm sharing a perspective. Will's sharing a perspective now. This whole podcast is a perspective. We're not talking about physics. So just keep that in mind on LinkedIn, that keep an open mind and think everyone's sharing a perspective, not a fact. Nothing on LinkedIn that I've ever read is objectively true. And I've been on LinkedIn for 8 years.
There's definitely nonsense on there, but I love this idea. I think it's the third video in our training program is the scientific method. And within that video and the worksheet that comes along with it, I'm paraphrasing slightly, but it's along the lines of do what works, not what I tell you to. So if there's training, if something's working, don't change it. Maybe you want to improve it and iterate on it, but don't kind of rip everything up into shreds as you learn about what we talked about earlier on, shiny object syndrome, which can very easily come from learning a new approach or a new perspective or a new opinion on things.
Could not agree
so with
more.
that said, Josh, we talked about, I think copywriting is completely underrated as a sales skill, especially as we've become more and more content focused, especially as there is value in becoming known in your industry, an expert in your space to, most people are selling, you and I included, a commoditized product or service. The difference between my training and your training, a lot of it is people want to work with Josh, people want to work with Will. People think I'm an idiot. There is people's thoughts and opinions and beliefs kind of come in and it is the layer on top of the product kind of deliverable. So I think copywriting is massively underrated and we should all, even myself included, should be doubling down on that. Are there any other, if we consider copywriting as a fundamental of modern B2B sales, are there any other fundamentals that we should be leaning into for, an account executive, an SDR, or an SDR wanting to become an account executive, especially in the larger deal size space?
So a couple more. I think the next one that I would say is mindfulness. We don't have to get too woo-woo-y on the podcast here because I think people have the wrong misconception of what mindfulness is and meditation is. It's not getting rid of your thoughts and sitting in silent. But so much of the anxiety that I see in sales and the stress is so related to people not being aware of their thoughts. So they feel a certain way, they're not aware of their thoughts, and they spiral into these downward moments like, oh my God, am I going to miss my quota? Am I going to get fired? Am I going to be on a PIP? And without knowing it, it affects your mood for months, sometimes even years, without, again, you knowing it. What mindfulness training does is it helps you learn and understand your mind and helps you realize that you are not your thoughts. You're an observer of them. Now, that might sound bananas if you've never done mindfulness or meditation, but with practice, I've been doing it now for 4 or 5 years, you can start to separate the things you're thinking from you as a person. Like there's a subject-object relationship, and it just calms you down. You get to observe things and you notice that, oh, this is just another thought that's coming and going like I want tacos. And it just kind of turns the volume down and you start to realize that right now, this second, there is no problem. Like I'm okay, I'm alive, I'm working, I'm whatever. And if I look back on my whole life, even when things have been crazy, the universe has always had, things have worked out. So this mindfulness, I use an app called Waking Up. I'm not affiliated with it. It's created by Sam Harris, but it's in addition to a mindfulness app, it teaches you how the brain works, which I find absolutely fascinating to know how your brain works. So that would be an area. And then the second one I would say is business acumen. So how to sort of think like a CEO or think like a VP of sales, having some basic business acumen under your belt. So I'd say copywriting, mindfulness, business acumen. And then the fourth and final one, probably equally as important, is knowing how to actively listen so people feel heard and understood. That again is a skill like boxing. All these things are, by the way, is a skill like boxing that we take for granted because we've been taught to listen our whole life. And if you take it for granted and you don't realize it's a skill, you're not going to be a good listener. Probably. It's not a default behavior people have. I was just writing a post last week. I don't know if you've experienced it. Let me ask you this. I'm amazed when I go out to dinner with friends or with my wife. I am never asked one question. Like the whole time. I could say my wife and I jumped out of a plane with just a parachute and no instructor, and they'd say, "Oh, that's cool. We went on this trip to the Grand Canyon like last month." Like people are not curious because I don't think they're even aware. Like have you experienced that, Will? Like when you're out with people, do they ask questions or do you not see that all happen?
It stands out to the point of I was at a wedding about a month ago and I was sat with one of my wife's colleagues, both doctors, and she was asking me questions and I was like, damn, these are good questions. And then we started chatting a bit more and I was like, you could host a podcast. And it's because she's in elderly medicine and she spends a lot of her time just chatting with the elderly patients who've got dementia, Alzheimer's. So they're probably talking somewhat nonsense, but she has to get them talking so they just calm down, so they can do blood and so they can it's not as easy to say, how are you feeling today, with someone who is, they've got long-term dementia and they may not be able to communicate how they're feeling. So we chatted about this. I was like, you'd be a fantastic podcast host because she has patience. She's listening rather than formulating the next, which is what everyone does typically. They're formulating the next question whilst the person is speaking. And she also does what you do very well. I've noticed on this podcast, other podcast, leaving pauses, gaps, just allowing a little bit of tension, positive tension, rather than trying to fill every single space with more and more stuff. And that she stood out to me. And I said, complimented her on it, and encouraged her that if she wanted to go into any content creation, if she wanted to build a brand, build a name for herself, obviously in the medical space, you get the biggest name gets the funding, the biggest name gets all the attention to their work. So she could absolutely go down that route. And as I said, the rest of the wedding, obviously just getting pissed and dancing with strangers. But that stood out to me as a moment of, this person is skilled at this. So it's a rare commodity.
Yeah, and I also think too, it's helped me in discovery calls. Like to your point, you make a great point. Most people, if they don't have this training, you're thinking of the thing you want to say next. When you do mindfulness training, you're aware that you're about to talk. Like it creates this awareness, and in that moment, you can focus on the prospect more. So for instance, I was on a discovery call last week. Josh, our salespeople, they don't like picking up the phone. Now, if I didn't have mindfulness training, I would say something like, well, I work with people like that all the time. That's exactly what I help with. And I kind of go on how to solve the problem. But in that moment, I was aware that I was about to do that. And instead, in that gap, I made a different choice. And the choice that I made was saying this. What's your theory on why that is? And it just opened up. And this is important because people will not trust what you recommend unless they feel like they're understood first. It would be like if you walked into a restaurant and said, you're having the egg foo young. You're like, dude, I don't even know, like what? I don't even know if I even like to eat that. But with this skill, when people feel understood, they're more likely to trust what you recommend because they feel like you get them, especially if you summarize after. So that's the skill that mindfulness ties in, specifically not even just being a good person like this doctor, and you're good at this too, Will. I'm curious to know if you've worked on this as a skill. Actually, that's a question for you. Have you worked on this as a skill from your podcast, or is this something that just sort of pick up along the way?
The skill of actively listening.
Yeah, and being curious and asking different probing questions. And
I think I was brought up to be curious. So doing these podcasts, the quality of it is obviously subjective. People may enjoy them, people may not. So I'm not saying I am quantitatively good at this. But I find them relatively easy to do. Same with discovery calls as well. I enjoyed the discovery call. And in our training program, we have group coaching every week, a couple of sessions a week. I enjoy doing all them because I enjoy listening, doing what you just absolutely outlined of why is that. And you add tremendous value to people, even if you end up doing business with them, but as from a consultative process by asking that question, because typically people, they haven't pondered why. Sometimes people can solve their own problems. Yes. And then they give you a bunch of other problems. And then they just want to spend time with you. And then it can become, depending on the product or service that you're selling, you've separated yourself out from all the other commoditized products and services in the marketplace. People just want to buy from you because they want to spend more time with you. People like to be heard, and there's multiple layers to it. But as to your question, I rarely listen back to podcast episodes. But when I do, there's always a layer of questioning that I feel like I could have done better on. So I have that feedback loop of wanting, I'm proactively wanting to be curious and wanting to go a layer of detail. And I'm conscious of time, Josh, and there's one thing you said earlier on about the mindfulness, and you kind of shrugged it off. And I'm curious. I think that this would be valuable to the audience because I'm somewhat bigoted on this. So if you've got a different opinion or different experience, it'd be valuable for the audience. So you mentioned mindfulness. I use Headspace app. I don't do it as often as I should, but I try and meditate multiple times per week. There's tremendous value in just being able to calm your mind. Big important call, just 2 minutes to chill beforehand to reset. I do it before these podcast episodes. I will walk around the house and just try not to think of anything and just reset from whatever activity I did beforehand. You mentioned, you said, this isn't woo-woo. or I think that was the exact phrase that you said. And obviously we don't want to scare off the audience immediately by talking about mindfulness. Do you prescribe like a layer deeper than that of like this idea of like the law of attraction, or that if you think about something for long enough, the universe will conspire to help you achieve it or get there? Do your kind of, whether that be a belief or feeling, does it go layers deeper than just that surface level of mindfulness?
No, I don't believe because you think something it'll happen. I don't go down that path. I think anything you want to get better at requires work. But I will say, just based on my experience, the things that I've worried about worked out. So I'm deciding between two jobs. Should I leave Jellyvision, been there for 8 years, and go to work for Jason Fried over at 37 Signals at Basecamp? Oh my gosh, did I spend way too much of my life going back and forth on that? And I've had a lot of things like that in my life, forks in the road. And what I've realized is it works out okay. Even if it doesn't work out, you learn something and you go on to something else that's usually end up, better. I mean, I had a girl in high school that I dated forever. I was going to marry her. She broke my heart, left me for the captain of the football team. There was no possible way I was ever going to meet someone else. Then I met Jenna. Like, it all works out. Where we get into trouble, which is where mindfulness helps, is we don't even realize that we're now lost in thought. And meaning we're not aware it's even happening if you're not mindfulness trained. And this can go on for years, months, weeks, days. What the mindfulness does, the superpower that it gives you, and has given me at least, is it allows you to step back and observe it. Sometimes I'll ruminate I'm getting better at this, but it'll be 4 or 5 hours, and then I'll suddenly be like, oh, whoa. And then I'll be able to step back. When you get good at this, that distance gets shorter. So that's where I think the skill is. That I think is a timeless skill. I can't think of a better way to spend 10 minutes a day than understanding how your mind works and getting a hold of it so it doesn't run, so your thinking doesn't run you.
So I'm same page as you. I don't think that there's people can find value in whatever they like. I'm not here to nudge people one way or another, but I think all that kind of stuff is just nonsensical, that you ponder on something for long enough that you're going to appear in your life. There may be elements of your subconscious start thinking about things and solving problems. You lead you on a pathway towards it. But I'm the same as you. The other thing that really helped me on the mindfulness perspective, especially if I'm sat stewing on something. So customers said something, it obviously rarely happens, but a customer says something that's obnoxious. I've had again, it's rare that I follow my missus, but my missus says something that annoys me. And I imagine, I'm quick enough to reject out the situation before I make it worse, right? The thing that helps me is writing it down in my journal. I have a journal on the computer, type it in there, I stare at that, and then I go, I'm an idiot. Because it's out of my head, and now it's almost like your higher consciousness can see the chimp brain that is just throwing all this stuff out there. And I find that when I write it down, again, typically on the computer rather than a piece of paper, but then I can observe it. And from a third party perspective, I can see that I was wrong, or this person's acting this way because of these three things. I find that really helpful as well.
Yeah, I mean, it allows you to see what others see. Like, to your point, I was at the dog park the other month or so ago, and the lady was asking me about my dog, and I told her I got the dog from a pet store, which is true. And she laid into me. You're a terrible person. Pet stores are puppy mills. And now your inclination, if you're not mindfulness trained, would be to defend why you got a dog from a pet store, right? But that is not going to go over well. So with mindfulness, I was able to, in that moment, think, okay, I'm about to lash out at this woman. How can I make her feel like I get her? So in that moment, I said, if more people adopted dogs, far fewer would be euthanized. Because yeah, that's right. I go, you are so passionate about finding dogs their forever home, right? And in that moment, doesn't mean I agree with her, but I'm able to see what she's seeing, and she opens up and talks. And after 5 minutes of getting it off your chest, she then said, well, what was your reason for getting it from the pet store? And we had a much better conversation because she felt heard first. Without mindfulness, and you see this on LinkedIn, you see this when you go out to dinner, if there's a political discussion, you can understand someone's perspective even if you don't agree with it. If you don't have mindfulness, you don't have that option. You're gonna go like this, right? So again, That to me is where the superpower skill is. And again, like boxing or piano, you can't just watch a video or do headspace for 10 minutes. It is an everyday thing. And what I don't know if you see this, but I now do it in my normal life. If I have a few minutes, I'll just sit and think about my thinking. If I'm swimming, and I find the mind fascinating what it thinks of. Like if you just think about your thoughts, you're like, that was random. I'm thinking about a taco and a shoe. Like what is going on up there? It's like if there was a megaphone attached to my brain, you would think I was crazy. like it's so random. It's entertaining. It's entertaining.
1/3 of the audience now is craving tacos because that's the second you mentioned it on this podcast. So it's something top of mind for you as well, Josh.
That's right.
Good man.
Definitely.
We'll wrap up with that, mate. Tell us where we can find out more about you. Is there anything you want to promote or put in front of the audience? Tell us where we can find it all.
I wrote a free book. People seem to like it. It's called For Sale. It's free on my website. If you go to joshbraun.com/shop, you can grab it over there.
Nice. I thought something else was coming then, and nothing else came back out. Josh has a bunch of products I've bought this years and years and years ago. Was it your Poke the Bear training?
Yeah. Thank you.
So I enjoy it, mate. I think you're killing it.
You.
I follow you on LinkedIn. I think you're either at or close to 250,000 followers on LinkedIn. So I'll put that in the show notes as well for anyone who's interested to learn more about, as we said, modeling people who are successful. Looking at some of Josh's posts, it's absolutely a reasonable way to look at what is high-level copywriting, if that's a fundamental skill that you want to pick up. And with that, Josh, I appreciate you, mate. And I want to thank you for joining us again on the podcast.
Thanks, Will. Always fun, man. Looking forward to doing it again sometime.